Hello everybody, this is Glen Mowrer, and today on The Next Step, TVSB, we are going to talk about a serious matter. I don't know if it can get any more serious than this, which we've titled an expanding nuclear threat. And I think the issue has been brought home recently by episodes around the world, both in the terms of the weaponry systems of the world, attitudes toward that weapon system, and also in the increasing reinvention and rediscussion of the possibility of nuclear power as a source to resolve things like global warming or other energy needs. So it's an issue that I think is timely and frightening in a way because it seems under the weather. To discuss this with me today, we are really fortunate to have with us David Krieger, who is president of the Nuclear Age Peace Foundation, and David is extremely knowledgeable about this, the subject of nuclear power in particular, or nuclear weaponry in particular, has been around the world fighting this fight and is really knowledgeable. David, welcome to TVSB.
Thank you. It's good to be with you, Glenn.
You and I have done shows before, and one of the shows we did in the past was on the attempt to modernize American weapon systems, in which they are going to make the weapon systems more efficient, spend $1 trillion of taxpayer money, and miniaturize these weapons into more easily delivered arms. That's one of the issues that I think that is frightening.
Right, that's the proposal coming out of the Obama administration, to spend $1 trillion over the next 30 years modernizing our nuclear arsenal.
Yeah.
And basically what that means is replacing every weapon in the nuclear arsenal, developing new delivery systems, new ICBMs, new cruise missiles, new bombers, new submarines. It's for those of us who think that nuclear weapons are dangerous and threaten humanity, it's a very bad sign to be planning to modernize the weapons and keep them. It looks like the plan is for at least another century. And I don't think humanity can afford to do that.
Well, the operative word that bothers me in this is this idea of miniaturization. They make them more easily delivered, I understand. Part of it is more reliable.
Right. They're developing dial-of-strength weapons and in some cases, making them smaller. What it does is makes them more usable. Military commanders may think that having a weapon that they can pinpoint on a target is something that makes sense militarily.
So it's
but
not just
we haven't crossed that threshold to use nuclear weapons again since Hiroshima and Nagasaki, except for testing nuclear weapons, which has been bad enough. But now with modernization, we're creating a temptation to have more usable weapons.
Well, one of the things that we've complained about North Korea, and there is an issue that's developed over the last few years especially. North Korea is a nuclear weaponized state. They have some nuclear weapons.
That's correct.
And we're accusing them of miniaturizing their weapon systems so they can put it on top of missiles, I guess, so make it possible for those missiles to carry a smaller payload, a more potent payload, and take it further and increase the risk of that delivery.
Unless you bring them down to a certain size and weight, you can't get a nuclear warhead married to a nuclear missile to deliver it. So North Korea is in the process of developing deliverable nuclear weapons.
By making them smaller, miniaturizing, which is something that we apparently have specifically done. We have a chart in there on sort of the extent of nuclear weaponry around the world, or the historic 50-year history of nuclear weaponry around the world. If you get that up once in a while, in a few moments we'll talk about that. But I think the point I'm trying to make is that you mentioned temptation to use a small weapon, a small nuke. We have Senator Cruz running for president talking about the idea of nuking ISIS.
Yeah, very irresponsible.
But the idea of it is that the potentially, the way it's got any potential credibility is that you have a weapon small enough that it won't destroy the whole nation of wherever they're, Syria, wherever they're attacking, just the small battlefield kind of weapons. Is that the idea?
Right. There have been developed many generations of tactical weapons throughout the nuclear age. But right now, there are not so many tactical nuclear weapons in the world. But tactical nuclear weapons are designed, in many cases, for battlefield use. It makes a temptation to cross the nuclear threshold, and smaller nuclear weapons can easily escalate into the exchange of larger ones. Nuclear weapons shouldn't exist on our planet. Our goal should be to eliminate them.
Absolutely.
That's what we do at the Nuclear Age Peace Foundation.
And we'll talk about your work in a moment. I do want to get back to that, but what you just said reminds me of an issue. In a way, one can argue that these the H-bombs, the weapons that got bigger and bigger and more potent, were less likely to be used than the small ones.
You can argue that they're less likely to be seen as effective tools of combat, but they're no less likely to be used by accident or miscalculation or virtually anything else. If you've got them, there's always a temptation to use them under certain circumstances.
Well, the United States, as we did in the previous show, discussed, and as you mentioned here, we're spending $1 trillion, sort of an employment occupation thing, to modernize our existing stock of nuclear weapons, make them more reliable, more effective, and more potentially useful, arguably. If we're not going to use them, why would we make them better?
I think it's a boondoggle.
I think
totally.
So too.
I think it's a way of transferring money to defense corporations
in states that need the help, like St. Louis area.
Well, there's better ways to prop up the economy than make nuclear weapons or make them more efficient.
But the other side of that to me is that we make these weapons more quote unquote efficient, miniaturized, smaller, more effective. You have I mentioned Senator Cruz's comments about making the desert turn to glass, or whatever that line was, glow, making the desert glow in fighting ISIS. And then we have Donald Trump also making statements that we'd probably be better off if more nations had nuclear weapons. So he talks about South Korea.
So those are two examples of very irresponsible expressions with regard to nuclear weapons.
But they become more sellable to the public if these weapons are smaller, don't they?
I don't think they become more saleable to the public. I think that it's not an issue that's much in the public domain, and there's a lot of hyperbole used with regard to nuclear weapons, and there's a lot of ignorance that surround what nuclear weapons do and what they're capable of doing. I think every American should get some education on what happened at Hiroshima and Nagasaki using relatively small nuclear weapons by today's standards.
That's true. President Obama, I am bothered by the refurbishment program, the $1 trillion program, but he's also convening, I think four times he's convened meetings at the White House to discuss controlling nuclear weaponry outside the authorized nations, not authorized, but the nations we know that already have them, and some of whom are authorized, quote unquote, under the UN resolutions.
No, they're not authorized.
Allowed.
They're not authorized and they're not allowed. The nations that signed the Non-Proliferation Treaty, for example, which are the permanent 5 members of the Security Council, the United States, Russia, UK, France, and China, are all obligated under that treaty to be engaging in good faith negotiations for nuclear disarmament. The idea of the Non-Proliferation Treaty was not only to stop the spread of nuclear weapons, but to level the playing field by these good faith negotiations for nuclear disarmament. So nobody is really allowed to have nuclear weapons. And the International Court of Justice has given an advisory opinion talking about the illegality of all nuclear weapons.
So this conference that the president has convened, I think 4 or 5 years now, trying to limit the spread of weaponry, especially recently in terms of his expressed concern that they might go into the hands of terrorists. What do you make of that? Is that a valuable exercise?
Well, I think it's a very good idea. However, at that meeting with some 52 countries represented, what they talked about was civilian bomb-grade nuclear material, and that accounts for about 3% of the bomb-grade nuclear material in the world.
Okay, when you say civilian, you mean things are outside of the control of governments?
Outside the control of the militaries. Yeah, governments, you could say, but militaries specifically. Mm-hmm. And there is a lot of enriched uranium and plutonium-239, tons and tons of it, more than well over 1,000 tons of it, and 97% approximately is in the military realm. So they weren't talking about that material. They were only talking about what comes out of civilian use for power plants, for example.
So this is part of this idea of an expanding threat. The longer we tolerate nuclear material for weaponry or other purposes, the more likely, the greater the stock of non-controlled materials grows.
Exactly.
Exactly.
I mean, it's a constant risk. As long as you have nuclear weapons and you have the bomb-grade material to make them, there's a possibility that it will land in the hands of terrorists. I mean, it's a real possibility. President Obama was making efforts to shut it down, but that's a good thing in and of itself, but it's not sufficient. It's not sufficient. I mean, terrorists are going to go where the weakest link protecting those materials may be. The weakest link may well be in Pakistan, may well be the government of the current or some future government of Pakistan. It's possible that nuclear weapons could be given to terrorists.
We've known that Pakistan was one of the earliest nations to break the Western hold on nuclear weaponry, and and actually helped create atomic weapons. I think maybe at one point they were talking about doing it for South Africa. I can't remember that for sure, but there was a clear...
Well, South Africa did it themselves. South Africa actually developed a small arsenal of nuclear weapons and then voluntarily gave them up.
Yeah. So we've got these various places where the threat of nuclear weapons are sort of oozing out from under the door. I mean, I don't know how to describe it otherwise, but 3% of this material is out there in the civilian market, potential for disastrous terrorist activities. Smaller, more efficient weapons are in the hands of nations that are a little out of control at times, like North Korea. We've got politicians speculating that we should have more nations with nuclear power. We've even been talking about use of small tactical weapons to control terrorism. So all of that adds up to some, I think, sort of a horrific idea of the future.
It adds up to people not realizing what's involved with the use of nuclear weapons. That's what I think. It comes out of public complacency about nuclear weapons. And if we want to be safe, if we want to be secure, it's not to build our arsenal, it's not to modernize our arsenal, it's to lead the way in convening good faith negotiations, as we're required to do, to eliminate all nuclear weapons. That's the goal we should be pursuing.
To a degree, people are maybe becoming blasé about the threat of nuclear weapons because, I mean, honestly, when you see it on TV, Hiroshima, they have a little memorial left of the remnants of the part of the city that was wiped out, but that's in a relatively small area of the city, and all around it, it's built up again. I don't know if that's not even a propaganda piece to sort of diminish the severity of the nuclear.
When you go to Hiroshima, it's not the monument with the eternal flame, the memorial cenotaph. That's a place of worship almost. Mm-hmm. It's the museum that captures the horror of what happened there. I mean, 90,000 people died almost immediately with that bombing. By the end of 1945, 145,000 people had died as a result of the Hiroshima bomb. And as I say, that was a small bomb by today's standards. So it wouldn't take much if we had a nuclear war, even a small nuclear war, to kill hundreds of millions or billions of people on the planet. And a large-scale nuclear war between the United States and Russia actually could result in sending us back into an ice age, making the planet uninhabitable.
And also, I think the increasing access to this material makes it more likely that it could be used in a terrorist act. And the one problem with a terrorist act is that there's really not retaliation. So retaliation isn't deterrent.
Right. You don't have a deterrent. Your deterrent, which requires a place to retaliate against, isn't there for terrorists. Yeah. And also, as we've seen, with horrendous acts of terrorism, they do it by suicide. Suicide.
That's part of the value. That's part of the purpose. On another front, we're now at the 30th anniversary of the Chernobyl disaster. It just happened. To this date, Chernobyl is empty land. There's 6,000 square miles, I think I saw.
What they call an exclusion zone.
And they're building a new sarcophagus. I love that phrase. They're building a sarcophagus over the top of this. I read that nobody knows what's really going on inside that nuclear meltdown that occurred there because they can't get into it very often.
That's right.
So doctors Frankenstein kind of strange things could be happening in that area. But you got 6,000 miles of land that's not really safe to habitate. And one of the things they're doing, they're studying the animals that come out of that area. And strange stuff is happening. I mean, they have radioactive animals escaping all over there. And getting into, I read recently that there were radioactive boars, are now into as far west as Germany. Their radioactivity, they apparently were associated with this population inside of that Ukrainian area, and they moved west. At the same time, in Fukushima, I just happened to see by recent that there's radioactive pig boars, that the wild pig, the domestic pigs became wild as they do. And now they're moving into Japan, in the lands of Japan. You can't eat them; they're much too dangerous to consume the meat. But we have these weird animals that are spreading this radioactivity among themselves.
And they're reproducing at a rapid rate because they can't be controlled easily.
Yeah. They said they can't kill them fast enough to reduce the population.
Right. I actually read that in Fukushima, they were incinerating the wild boars.
Right, I saw that.
The radioactive wild boars. So, I mean, that makes no sense. That puts the radioactivity into the air.
Yeah, the idea you can burn up radioactivity is a little silly.
Doesn't work.
No. Well, yeah, along the lines, the radioactive levels in these boars is 300 times human safe consumption points. In the past 3 years, the number of boilers has increased from 3,000 to 13,000, so exponential increase, and they seem to manage to stay radioactive. It's not like it's dissipating because there's still active radioactive materials in that site.
Yeah, in radioactive materials in the earth, in the food they eat.
The food they eat, and the air, the rains and the water and the soil. And then a third thing I saw, and I don't know how this all came together, but at Hanford, the Hanford site in Washington, where the American nuclear research was conducted and such waste and spillage and disaster, contamination occurred. Water is in the ground and heading toward the Columbia River Basin,
Right.
we think. But they're not, they've been finding radioactive rabbits in that area. So it's like some science fiction movie, the 50s. So we've got these three terrible sites, 5 years after Fukushima, 30 years after Chernobyl, and maybe 50 years after the Hanford disasters of our own, not one individual disaster, but cumulative disaster. Our environment is now being just
Assaulted. That's right, and there's no good answer at this point as to what to do with the radioactive waste that's being generated in the nuclear plants. Even if they don't have accidents, they have the problem of what to do with the waste. And these power plants with radioactive cores become attractive targets for terrorists or in time of war.
Well, certainly if Fukushima can go down an earthquake or a flood, I mean, it shows it's vulnerable. It shows that the technology is vulnerable to attack, and whether it be by nature or by humans, it's there.
It also shows that humans are fallible.
Absolutely.
And we don't create perfection in our technologies. And these accidents at Chernobyl, at Fukushima, at 3 Mile Island, all show that fallibility. And if we're fallible with civilian technology, we should stop and think how much our fallibility is present when it comes to weapons. Right. We have lots of examples of that.
And we rely on technology and mechanical systems, and we know they're fallible. Even if the human who operates them was perfectly reliable and consistent, things break down as they did at Fukushima. I just want to mention this one number. The Fukushima accident is estimated by the American Society of Mechanical Engineers to cost at least $500 billion in long-term damage. So it's a factory that might generate electricity for 25 or 40 years, maybe 50 years if they can extend it. And for that service, we're going to spend hundreds of millions of dollars, billions of dollars.
Billions.
Over.
And I suspect that's an underestimate.
But you take Chernobyl, you take Fukushima, you take 3 Mile Island, Hanford, all of these costs, and yet we still have the situation where the people are being sold that nuclear power is an expanding, what I call the expanding threat. We're back in the market again. France is selling a nuclear system to Great Britain, or going to set it up over there. China is going to build a huge number of nuclear powers to fight global warming.
You've got the other side of the picture too, with Germany opting out.
Opting out, that's right.
Stopping altogether. And what we're finding is that building these power plants is not really economic. They take a long time to get online. They're very expensive. There's cost overruns, and I think no industry would go into nuclear power without government subsidies, as we have here in the United States.
If government didn't assume the insurance risk, the liability risk of these operations, they could never exist.
That's right.
Because they always fail, and the cost, like the Fukushima cost, or the Chernobyl cost, which wasn't a private industry, but all the costs are much greater than any corporation would ever be able to cover or
would consider. It would be a business decision, and they wouldn't do it.
But nevertheless, our president, Obama, is supporting the idea of China building all these factories. We're getting down toward the end, and I just want to do this quick survey is what I was saying. So we've got weaponized atomic power is expanding again, it seems to me. We're getting more comfortable with the idea of it, talking about it more
Talking
casually.
about a new Cold War.
A new Cold War be healthy, some say. We're talking about terrorism having access to the expanded material that is out there.
Always a danger.
And
Has been a danger, will be a danger.
And then we're talking about which is part of this, of the idea of this false prophet, the siren song of nuclear energy that would get rid of global warming concerns when we know it's going to make the world uninhabitable for thousands of years in any spot that it fails, and it fails all the time.
It's the industry taking a try at getting themselves going again. Actually what the country needs and what the world needs is the move to renewable, sustainable forms of energy.
So we're going to finish up here now because I took you down this path. I know that you have published this article, an open letter to the American people about political responsibility in the nuclear age with a couple of your colleagues, and as part of your operation of your Nuclear Age Peace Foundation. In a couple of minutes, can you tell us what the drift of that is, what you would like people to do, and how they can participate?
Well, okay, first of all, the open letter that we sent was stimulated by our dismay that the issues related to nuclear dangers were not part of the discussion and debate among presidential candidates. Thinking about all the important issues confronting the country, that just didn't make the list. So,
You're right.
We believe that the issues around nuclear weapons and nuclear strategy and nuclear policy and nuclear disarmament, the abolition of nuclear weapons, need to be part of the national discussion. And that's what that article was about. So.
And how do you raise this, besides publishing and hoping the public responds to the arguments that you make, is there other things that you're doing, the organization does, and can viewers, in 30 seconds or so, can you tell how viewers can participate?
Viewers can get involved. They can go to the Nuclear Age Peace Foundation website at wagingpeace.org. They can sign up there by putting their email address on the website to get a free monthly newsletter called The Sunflower, and they also will be signed up for action alerts, so they'll get action proposals from the foundation on a fairly regular basis.
Good. So this show is about to close up. I want to remind folks that it's broadcast on Cable 17 in Santa Barbara. It's streamed onto Ustream and YouTube. You can find those shows by Googling The Next Step TVSB. You need the TVSB in there. And you can find this show, other shows I've done with David, and other shows that we've done over the last few years on the various subjects of interest, we hope, to you. Thank you, Juanita. Thanks to the state station. We'll see you all the next time around.